in front of the Israeli School, Universal Practical Knowledge, the Philadelphia Division, here at 3226 Cheltenham Avenue in Philadelphia. We're standing in front of the school right now, getting a description of the 12 tribe sign that's been painted by one of the brothers that was in the school: Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Simeon, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Naphtali, Asher, Issachar. Those are the 12 tribes of Israel.
Shalom. Shalom. You've been waiting for this day, so this day has finally come. A lot of you have been wondering where this knowledge that you've been hearing is coming from, and the powerful truth that you've been hearing, how this was established. Well, we finally were able to arrange for the priests to come down from New York and spend some time with us. And I'd like to introduce them if I can. These are some great brothers. We're very glad to have them with us. We want to make them feel as warm as possible, because this is their work and the extension of their work and what they've laid down some time ago. I'd like to introduce, first of all, priest and Sixth Shield General, fourth in command in the nation of Israel, Lahab. I'd like to salute this brother, Majah. Barak. Yeshabiam, which means sit. And I'm going to turn it over now to Priest General Lahab.
Water, brother. I'd like to say this, starting off, we're very impressed at your school here, and we're very impressed to see that the brothers and sisters in Philadelphia think enough of the Most High and the Bible and the truth and your nationality to be a part of this, because most of the brothers and sisters are running from the truth.
Okay, cut on concert, no sweat. Let me. All right, shalom, Salakia. You know what I mean? Another Monday night history class. It's like we're just a little late. But yeah, we got another Monday night history class. I believe we're live on Detroit, Toronto, and Windsor. Okay. Make sure you like and share the class. I'm gonna double check really quick just to see if we're live on Detroit. All right. If you're tuned in, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Okay, help push this truth out. Every Mondays, yeah, we're live on Detroit, Most High in Christ. So every Mondays, I'm gonna be going live on Detroit. Toronto and Windsor. Okay, I'm gonna be teaching. I mainly focus on the history of Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous in Canada. Um, but we definitely cover the history of all Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous around the world. Okay, gonna be continuing to do that. What's going on in the chat? Shalom, Yabashim Shabrakatha. To the brothers, shalom to the sisters, Yahweh Shamar, Alatha Bashim Rashad. All right. Again, this is Monday Night History class. The topic today I'm going to be touching on is an interesting topic, kind of segueing or building off of what we got into last week. Okay, last week, I was showing some information on the First Nations people inside of Canada that a lot of historians were surprised when they found these artifacts and villages of Indigenous people inside Canada, showing how advanced of a people natives are inside of Canada. You know what I mean? Showing how advanced their civilization was specifically inside of Canada. And many, what they would call Indigenous historians, European descent historians, touching on our culture, when they found this information in Ontario, they were confused as hell because they never knew that Indigenous were, such a capable and intelligent people before colonization, which again is going to, segue into some of the information that we get into today. Okay, this class specifically today, I'm going to answer the question as to why it's so hard to find history, not just of Blacks and Indigenous inside of Canada, but history in general inside of Canada. Okay, last week we had read an article where it was showing that that Canada has history of documents in this country that stacks higher. If you were to take the amount of documents that have not been released to the public inside of Canada, that stack goes higher than the CN Tower, which was once the tallest building on this entire planet. The amount of documents that Canada has not released to the public is absolute insanity. And there's so many researchers and historians that are fighting just to have the ability to read these documents. There's something called, I think it's like a 30-year rule. 30-year rule in many Western societies inside of America, inside Europe, that says if you have documents that are older than 30 years, it's damn near law to release it to the public. Canada does not have that. We got 100-year-old documents that nobody has ever read outside of the government of Canada itself. You know what I mean? You'd have to have some kind of special, not coverage, but access to these documents to even be able to touch them and read them and know what they are. And that's going on to this day. Historians are fighting to read these documents because people want to know Canadian history. You know what I mean? They simply want to know Canadian history. All right. And so this class, I'm going to touch, a little on why people don't know anything about Canada and Canadian history. All right. First thing, I'm going to pull up what year Canada was established as a country. All right, I don't need to share my screen on this. This is just a quick AI overview. Anybody can look it up. All right, not hard to find. This is an AI overview of Canada's creation. It says it was a gradual, century-long process rather than a single event. It first became a self-governing country on July 1st, 1867, known as the Confederation of Canada. Okay. Full legal independence was achieved in 1931, and the Constitution was completely patriated, brought under exclusive Canadian control on April 17th, 1982. Okay. So why am I saying this? Number one, being in the year 2026, Canada, technically, people would say or argue, is really only a 150-year-old country. Okay? 150-year-old country. All right? When you look at that timeline in 1867, you had things happening in America like the emancipation of slavery. Okay, I always get that date wrong. I believe it was 1883? Let me look up really quick. Emancipation of slavery in America is listed at 1863. Okay, 1863, you have what's called the emancipation of slavery, where, they begin to, quote unquote, end that hard bondage of blacks and indigenous inside of America. 1863. When we look at when Canada was established as a country, it's 1867. 3 years after the 4 years after the emancipation of slavery inside of America. Now, why is that important? Because when you look at a lot of what is taught, and not just taught, but the lack of information that is taught about Canadian history of slavery, many people recognize, or many people have been taught this ideology that blacks left slavery in America seeking refuge inside of Canada in the Underground Railroad to seek freedom. So people have this, this idea in their minds that people went to Canada to be free. Black slaves and indigenous slaves went to Canada to find freedom. And so, what time is slavery in America? It's before 1863, meaning, and you have to understand this. Okay, I'm going to bring up a scripture in a second on this. You have to understand that during the time when so-called blacks are leaving America and going into Canada to find freedom, Canada is not even a country. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Canada is not even established as a country at this time. So if you're a black slave in 1820, running from, your plantation inside of America to go north into Canada, Canada is not a country yet. It's not officially established as a country. You look up historically, you'll see names like New France. Okay, New France, New Britain. These were the names of, the French and the British, of areas that they were conquering inside of the North Americas. So in 1820, you're a black slave, leaving your plantation in Louisiana. You're going to north to get away, as far away as possible from your plantation, and you're coming into a land that is not at the time known as Canada. Okay. If you were to, speak to, run into some indigenous people, living in this area, they may have called it Canada. Princess, don't come over here. Okay, they may have called it Canada, all right, or whatever words they used to describe the land, but it was not officially Canada, at that time. Canada was established in 1867. Okay, this is 4 years after the emancipation of slavery in America. So Canada is not an old country. It's a 150-year-old country. Okay, that's number one. So why is that important? Because if you're coming up in a Canadian education system, are you going to be taught that Canada had slaves? Well, Canada isn't even a country. Technically, it's not even considered a country yet. So why are they going to give you some history lesson on, Canada having slaves? There's a scripture in Psalms that speaks on the nature and the character of Esau. Okay? And it says his words are smoother than butter. A better analogy, the perfect analogy of understanding Europeans is what he was called in the Garden of Eden. He was called a serpent. You know what I mean? When you think of a serpent as an analogy of a man, that person is low down and dirty. That's what you think. You call you call somebody today, you call them a rat. You know what I mean? You think this somebody is, somebody's a snitch. You call somebody a snake today. What do you think of? Somebody who's two-faced. You know what I mean? Somebody, you got to watch their words, watch what they say. That's how the Bible describes the European man, who's known as Esau or the Edomites in the Bible. Very slick with his word. He's very snake-like in character, the way he speaks. I mean, what's another way they say you speak with a forked tongue? How many times did indigenous people, say this about our oppressor? The European speaks with a forked tongue. You know what I mean? That is a perfect analogy of Europeans and their character. You know what I mean? They're such serpents. And when you take that mentality or that characteristics of this man, and now you have these people establishing, a whole goddamn school curriculum inside of Canada. These are the people responsible for teaching you and educating you. They have that, history lessons they give you. Well, Canada wasn't a nation. we didn't exist as a nation inside of Canada till 1867. We didn't have slaves. What are you talking about? Not just that, another important date is it's around 1830 which is 30 years before the emancipation of slavery in America. Canada had their emancipation. It was around 1830, which is 30 years before America. Does that mean that Canadians or the Europeans in Canada aren't racist because their emancipation was 30 years before white people, before America? Hell no. You devils had blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous in slavery just as it happened in the Americas. Slavery was no different. You understand? Maybe the condition of the environment was different. You know what I mean? Especially when you're going from, you say, northern Canada to somewhere like Florida. Well, now you have very different environmental conditions. So slavery looks different because you're not out in a field in the heat picking cotton. You're in the cold northern parts of Canada during a certain time. So your slavery is different. Your slavery looks more like, you're inside of a house, raising your oppressor's kids or serving your oppressor's kids. You know what I mean? Canada had a lot of different skilled trades that slaves had, which is something, if we have time, I may look at some of those articles. Black slaves and indigenous slaves in Canada were blacksmiths and carpenters. You know what I mean? They were tradesmen inside of Canada. You know what I mean? They were working inside of, mines, inside of caves, mining resources and all this. All of this is free labor, okay? Whether you're in Canada, America, or the Caribbean islands, it was slavery. And something that is extremely scary for Canadian history is, guess what? Because Canada was not recognized as a country during slavery, that means that your black ass and indigenous ass inside of Canada, you were not protected by any laws. What's interesting inside of Canadian history is that when you look up places like the Caribbean islands, or you look up America, there's something called black codes. And those black codes governed how Europeans interacted with slaves. Well, guess what was scary for the black man and indigenous man inside of Canada is that you did not have the black code. You didn't have Canada being recognized as a governing body or a country to even have laws to govern how Europeans dealt with slaves inside of Canada, which is very scary for a black man, very scary for an indigenous man. And what they'll say is historically is inside of Canada, they adhered to a lot of the black codes found in the French islands. Why? Because you had the same, body of Europeans, just spread out throughout the quote unquote new world. So how the French dealt with slaves, say in Martinique, in a French colony in the Caribbean island, they'll say that's how Europeans dealt with their slaves in Canada. How the French Europeans dealt with slaves in Canada. But a lot of these things are undocumented. Like I said, there's so much history inside of Canada that is not released to the public. We should be very scared of what happened to the slaves inside of Canada. There's a lot of stories of, slaves being found frozen inside of a river. And nobody knows where that slave was from. Nobody knows how that slave was dealt with. Nobody knows the history of what happened to that brother or that sister, because there is no record of them inside of Canada. There's no record of that slave. They don't have a history here. They're just found frozen in a river somewhere. Lord knows what was done to them during slavery. I'm going to pull up a quick video to better help start this class off, and then we're going to go through some articles. All right. We do not own the rights to this video. Okay, we're just sharing this video for teaching purposes. All right, we do not own the rights to this video. It's a 2-minute clip off YouTube. from a sister at who's a professor at York University. York University is a college or a university near to the city of Toronto. All right. I got my screen shared.
Entangled in the history, the long history of the transatlantic slave trade. Canada is very much entangled in the history, the long history of the transatlantic slave trade. And we need to continue to do a better job of presenting that in our historical past.
Now, number one, and this is something, again, this is why I did this class topic today, because there's a very scary, repetitive thought when you start speaking on slavery inside of Canada. And it's that we need to do a better job. Who's we? Canada. Canada needs to do a better job representing its historical past. Why does it need to do a better job? Because nobody knows about Canada's history. Nobody knows about it.
The aim of my research is to document the scope and the nature of the institution of enslavement here in the province through an exploration of the experiences and the lives of those who were enslaved.
This is a university college professor who has made it her job to find and uncover, discover, and release to the public more about Canadians' history of slaves. What's something that we have to understand is that this idea of Canada not teaching people about its history or its dark past is so goddamn repetitive that a professor has to actually dedicate her life to uncovering Canada's history. This is a college professor at a university, and she recognizes and she's taking on that personal obligation and responsibility to better educate her students on Canadian history. She feels like she's failing. And there's so many historians inside of Canada who touch on this topic that say the same thing. We got to start asking, like, what is it that Canada is hiding? Why is Canada so afraid to tell the world about its history?
It is important for me to ensure that their lives, their humanity, and their experiences are firmly situated and anchored in the research that I'm doing to better understand how enslavement played out in this particular Canadian context. The work that I am undertaking is a traditional dissertation, but also to put together a website along with a database that will gather a lot of these fragmented archival resources that I've retrieved during my research, to put them together in this place and to create biographical narratives of the people who were held in bondage here in Ontario. So for me, it's a work of passion, again, in terms of furthering our understanding of Black and African experiences here in this context, and creating new accessible resources for people to learn more and to even teach more about these histories and these stories.
You know what I mean? And there are few people inside of Canada like this sister, you know, who are taking the time to really dig into the past so that we can get out these people's story, so that we can get out the stories of the enslaved inside of Canada, so that we can better teach people, you know, specifically Blacks and Indigenous, regarding their history here in Canada. Because these stories are so goddamn hard to find.
History plays an important role in understanding the continuities of the systemic oppression, the systemic marginalization against people of African descent. So all of this is important in understanding the plight of Black Canadians. And when we continue to look at the disproportionate outcomes that Black Canadians face, all of these are interconnected and are rooted in this particular history of anti-Black racism.
This is just to understand that there is a problem inside of Canada. The problem is that nobody knows Black or Indigenous history. There was a Slovakia. There was a what's it called? The National Committee, forgive me if I say this wrong, of Truth and Reconciliation, which I believe was established. Well, let me see if I can pull up the date. I think it's called the Truth and Reconciliation. When was it established? Yeah, it's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, was established June 2008. In 2008, what is that? 17 years ago? 16 years ago? In 2008, there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that is established. I'm going to read the purpose of it. It was created as a mandated component of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement to document the history and lasting impacts of the residential school system. Let me share my screen. Because, again, this goes right into the theme of what is Canada hiding? See if I can zoom in. Okay, this is just a quick AI overview. It says the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was established in June 2008. This is 16 years ago. This is not a long time ago. It was created as a mandated component of the Indian Residential School Settlements Agreement to document the history and lasting impacts of the residential school system. You want to know one of the main reasons this was established? Because nobody knows what residential schools are. Nobody knew inside of Canada what a residential school was. Nobody knew the history of Canadians. Nobody knew the history of Indigenous people inside of Canada. It's non-existent to people. Canadians don't know Canadian history. They don't know it. So organizations like this are created so that they can document the goddamn history of what happened to Indigenous people in Canada. Make people aware inside of Canada of what happened to Indigenous people inside of residential schools. Why? Nobody knows Canadian history. They don't. And I got an article that's going to better explain um, some of what's going on inside of Canada. This is a article that was written from the Walrus. It's a Walrus Canadian news outlet speaking on Canada's conversations. Okay, it says the Canadian narrative about slavery is wrong. What is they saying is wrong? Meaning what people know about Canadian history and what they've been taught is literally just wrong. People don't know it. This article was published in 2017. Okay. It says, casting ourselves as the saviors of African American fugitives fits neatly into our national identity. But this country too was founded on exploitation. What's that narrative? It's a narrative everybody knows. It's not a secret. You go and ask, just the everyday person, what do they know about Canada and its participation in, the transatlantic slave trade? They are going to tell you the exact same thing, that Canada was the place or the end of the Underground Railroad. This is where Black people came to be free. That's literally what's taught to everybody. And this piece is saying it's just straight up wrong. Saying that this country, Canada, too, was founded on exploitation. And then they post, here's just an example of, let's see what this says. This is an advertisement that appeared in May. This is the year 1794. So that would be 40 years before Canada emancipated slaves. It says a runaway from the subscriber of Richmond in the district of Gapby. On April, a Negro man named Jane left Charles from Times. He is about 5 feet inches high, speaks good English, and from a Mi'kmaq, aged about 38 or 4 teeth, and has the ends of both his great. A lot of this is cut off, so it's hard to read it. Oh, I can open it up. Salaki. It says, he's a runaway from the subscriber at New Richmond in the district of Gapy on Saturday, the 29th of April. A Negro man named Jane, who calls himself Charles from Times. He is about 5 feet 8 or 10 inches high, speaks good English, and forms broken French and Mi'kmaq, aged about 38 or 40 years. It's describing his teeth and has the ends of both his great toes frozen off. The ends of his toes were frozen off. Whoever will take up said Negro and confine him in any of the jails or prisons in this province of Lower Canada and notify the subscriber by the earliest opportunity shall receive a reward of $20, as the said Negro has been guilty of theft and many other misdemeanors. Okay? So this is just an example of, a paper during the time of 1790s. Can I close that? Okay, of 1790s, speaking on a runaway slave, just showing that there, was slavery in Canada going on during this time. Okay, the article goes on to say, on a Saturday morning in February 1786, that's what I just read. Going down, it says, Joe, described as an African-born Negro man and the property of William Brown Printer was fluent in French and English. He was also different from other enslaved people in the province, who at the time were primarily indigenous. So during 1797, you had black slaves, and primarily you had a lot of indigenous slaves. Okay? This is something that the article was letting us know, that you have black slaves, you have indigenous slaves inside of Lower Canada, which is another word for Ontario. It says, compromising about a third of the enslaved population was African Canadian, African American, or African Caribbean, some having arrived as secondary cargo in the merchant ships filled with hogsheads of rum, sugar, and molasses that traded along the established Atlantic routes. So you got African Caribbean slaves, you got African American slaves, right? You got slaves coming right from Western Africa. You have a majority of indigenous slaves. All of this is happening in 1790s, in the 1790s. So again, what is that telling you? Slavery is alive and well inside of Canada. Again, that narrative that was taught that Canada is this safe place for, blacks to come and be free. We just got it wrong. It's just not true. Just like America was built off the back of blacks and indigenous slaves, is the same way Canada was built, off the back of free labor, off the backs of blacks and indigenous Caribbean slaves. We built Canada. It says, Joe, born in Africa, was a minority within a minority. That we know about Joe at all is largely due to his skills as a breakout artist. 6 fugitive slave ads published between 1777 and 1786 document 5 of his escapes, the last of which resulted in 2 notices. So you're seeing from this man is a, runaway slave. He's a breakout artist. He's good at breaking out of his, from his slave owner. You know what I mean? And this is documented from 1777 until 1786. It says, yet we know from Brown's own papers that Joe actually escaped more than the 5 times documented in the advertisements. Fugitive slave ads reveal details only about successful escapes. If an enslaved person was recaptured prior to the printing of the weekly paper, the owner had no need for such a notice, meaning Lord knows how many times, this man ran away from his plantation. But those aren't documented inside of ads because they had no need to put the ads out. They caught his black ass. You see what I'm saying? The slavery going on in America was the same inside of Canada. I say that all the time. It says, the owner had no need for such a notice. The announcements are also some of the earliest instances of fake news, given that slave owners sought to incentivize the public's participation in the capture and return of the fugitive slaves. Meaning, again, this article is showing you, it's also giving you an understanding of, the whole province of Ontario. They're putting out this advertisement in the public. Why? Because that's what's happening in the everyday life of Ontario. Slavery. We're putting out this slave ad because all the Europeans in Ontario got slaves. And and us as white people got to band together and capture this runaway Negro. Right? It says, where was I? It says, the public's participation in the capture and return of the fugitive. They commonly printed evidence of crimes. So a practice, they're saying a practice, of these advertisements, it was popular to advertise fake crimes of black runaway slaves just to get the public's participation. Meaning you lie on this black man, Lord knows what white people are going to do when they find him. Now, again, as I said earlier, Canada did not have black codes, meaning you look up a black code of a runaway slave inside of Virginia, there is a penalty on how to deal with this slave. During this time in 1780s in Canada, there is no black code, meaning your oppressor is left to do whatever the hell he wants with your black ass. Not only is he left to do whatever he wants with you, but like you got to understand the nature of this beast. You imagine, think of all the atrocities you've ever read, about black slaves and the mistreatment of blacks or indigenous people, under their slave owners. That's what that man is capable of doing. And inside of Canada, you don't have no goddamn law governing him. In 1780, Canada isn't even a country yet. 1780 is 100 years before Canada is established as a country. There's there's stories, many times of, you say these are things that they try to, tell people when they go on trips to other countries. Let's say, you're a 22-year-old woman and you want to go travel to Mexico. What do they tell you? Make sure you go to the city. Make sure you go somewhere where a lot of people can see you, where you're a little more safe. Don't go out to the country or the bush in Mexico. What do they say about Trinidad? You go to a bush in Trinidad, you're going to get raped. You're going to get, what's that word? Trafficked. You know what I mean? You're going to get kidnapped. You know what I mean? They're going to use you to blackmail you for money because, in a bush inside of Mexico, they want some American dollars. So, they're going to kidnap your black ass. You take yourself to the wrong part of Mexico. They're going to kidnap your black ass. You go to the wrong part of Trinidad. Don't go to the bush. You're not safe there. These are the things they tell you. Could you imagine being a black slave going to the bush inside of Canada where white people are left with no law to govern how they treat your black ass? Man, that is a scary thought. You see some of these slave movies and you see these European men and they got their loudmouth, their loudmouth wife yelling at them, don't be so harsh to the slave. Maybe somebody was there to calm his bloodlust down just a little bit on how he treated you. You were inside of Canada, you had nobody watching. You had no protection, nobody to watch or see what is happening, see how you're treated. It's not even documented on what happened to your black ass inside of Canada. You're just found frozen in a river somewhere. Shoot, this article we just read, this man's toes were, he didn't have no toes because they froze off. Lord knows what his slave owner did to them. Do you think that man's just running from his plantation for no reason? This man wants to live. There is no laws governing how Europeans handled you inside of Canada. They just speculate that they probably followed the same black code that they had for you in other places of society, in other places in the, in the Caribbean islands, other places in the South. That's how they dealt with their slaves there. These are just some codes to follow how to deal with the Negroes. Well, 1780, there's no Canadian law yet. It's not even a country. It's not even a goddamn country yet. It says, for example, when on April 29th, 1794, a middle-aged Negro man named Isaac fled from Azaria Pritchard Sr., Pritchard's ad, placed almost a month later, claim that said Negro has been guilty of theft and many other misdemeanors. It should now be obvious that the sale and auction and escape of enslaved Africans and indigenous people were regular occurrences in Quebec and Ontario, as well as in various maritime provinces. We don't only have the repositories of newspaper notices to prove this, we also have bills of sales, personal correspondence, business ledgers, court cases, cemetery and hospital records, estate inventories, and wills. This material reveals important information about the lives of the enslaved and the enslavers, and the practice of slavery in the territories that became Canada. So we're reading about some of the stories before Canada is even known as a country. This is important to understand. Okay, these dates help you better understand why, this devil has the ability to be smooth with his words. Canada never had slaves. What are you talking about? We didn't have slaves. We didn't mistreat blacks and indigenous in Canada. We weren't even a goddamn country yet. That's what they would love for you to believe. Makes the white man in Canada look a lot better. What do Canadians love to say? Well, indigenous people had slaves. They're the savage inside of Canada. They enslaved their own people. The Bible says his words were smoother than butter. Remember that. This man is an absolute snake, an absolute serpent. His crimes inside of Canada, I guarantee, are worse than this world has ever seen. There's a reason that they don't teach their history. It says, so why don't Canadians know anything about this history? There's that repetitive thought that I brought out. There's the thought of what that sister we just, listened to. She's dedicating her life as a professor at a college, teaching history, dedicating her life to waking people up to Canadian history. She feels it's her obligation because nobody knows about Canada's history. This is what Europeans have done an amazing job of inside of Canada. Like I gotta give it up to Europeans in Canada. You are the absolute epitome of the devil. That word devil means to deceive. You white people in Canada have deceived the world into believing that slavery in Canada didn't even happen. Like, my hat goes off to Europeans in Canada. Well done. The world doesn't know about slavery in Canada. Well done. You are an absolute snake, an absolute serpent. The Bible did an amazing job, defining the character of the Edomites. This paper says, so why don't Canadians know anything about this history? That's a question. What's the title of this class? Canada Hiding History. Is it too dark of a past? Why are Canadians hiding their history? Why doesn't anybody know about Canadians' history? Canada's history. I'm curious to know. It says, so why don't Canadians know anything about this history? Now, this is as it says right here, my university students, meaning the person speaking on this right here, this is a university or college professor. And they're saying, my university students are a case in point. In my 15 years as a university professor, I have yet to come across one student who has entered my classroom already knowing that slavery existed here. Ooh-wee. This ain't some black man who don't got no goddamn job and nothing better to do to just spew out information on the internet. This is a college professor inside of Canada. This is a college professor who has documented in their 15 years as a college professor that not one student, goddamn, not one student has entered their classroom already knowing that slavery existed inside of Canada. So you mean to tell me that you're going to college or university inside of Canada and you're majoring in goddamn history and you don't even know that it existed inside of Canada? I don't know if people could wrap their minds around that. Man, when the Bible says Esau is a devil, he is a shoot, what does John say? He is the father of lies. Could you imagine having the title of the father of lies? Let's see if I can pull that verse out of John. Damn, John chapter 8, verse 44. I mean, like that scripture just made so much more sense. Even thinking about what this man has been able to accomplish on the earth. Like the Bible says, he has deceived the earth. This man has literally deceived the earth. This is John chapter 8 and verse 44. It says, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning. Now, this is the characteristics of the white man. He was a murderer from the beginning. What do we read in the Bible? What's the beginning? That book of Genesis. Baryath in the Hebrew. Baryath means beginning. It's the first book in the Bible. Cain unalived his brother Abel. That's what we're reading about in John 8:44. Telling blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous, you acting like your father the devil. Who is your father? These Romans. You're acting like your Roman daddy. And it says, and the lust of your father ye will do. This is Christ telling blacks, black people, that you're acting like the Romans. He's checking the piss off of black people, telling them, stop acting like these goddamn Romans. And then Christ goes on to say he was a murderer from the beginning, meaning this is who he is. This is who these Romans are. This is who these Greeks are, these Russians, these Europeans, these Caucasians. Cain, he was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth. He didn't live in truth. That's not how he lived his life. You got to think about what it says in Genesis. What did Cain, offer the Most High? He's like, well, here's some, some corn that I grew. So what Cain offered the Most High. Here's a little wheat that I grew, Lord. This is a good harvest. Try to deceive the goddamn Most High. Says because there is no truth in him. There's no truth in Europeans. None whatsoever. That's why in the UPK we call him the devil, the deceiver. That's what he does. There's no truth inside of Caucasians. None. That's their character. It says when he speaketh a lie, means anytime a European lies about anything, he speaketh of his own. Could you imagine that? Every time you go around lying, anytime a Caucasian lies, he's just speaking about himself. Why? Because he is a liar and the father of it. This goddamn man invented lies. Europeans, Caucasians, they created deception. You want to learn how to deceive somebody? Ask a white man. You want to learn how to tell a good lie? Ask the white man. He'll teach you because he's the father of it. Isn't that what you want to, learn how to work on a Cadillac? You go find the father of Cadillac. Learn how he put that engine together. Ask the man that invented something. He's the father of it. He'll tell you how to get it done. You want to learn to lie? Ask a Caucasian man. He's the father of it. So heavy what Christ taught us and understanding the nature of these people. They are the father of lies. They're the father of deception. And what does this article say? It said, I have yet to come across one student who has entered my classroom already knowing that slavery existed in Canada. Well done, Canada. Well done to the Caucasian race. Nobody knows about your history in Canada. Not one goddamn history major knows about slavery in Canada. Could you imagine that? He is the father of lies. the father of deception. It says, what they have all been schooled in without fail. Understand this. If you've grown up inside of Canada, without fail, is that white Canadians were valiant abolitionists. God damn. Could you imagine that? I gotta save. I'm gonna save this article right here. I need to copy this. This professor said, I'm gonna read this again. In my 15 years as a university professor, I have yet to come across one student who has entered my classroom already knowing that slavery existed here inside of Canada. Not one student. It says, the professor went on to say, what they have all been schooled in without fail, meaning the Canadian education system, without fail, is that white Canadians were valiant abolitionists. Man. That's why, the ISUPK is so valuable. Because I learned under Commanding General Yohana that Caucasians, they are the devil that the Bible speaks of. And if it wasn't for Commanding General Yohana, this article may not make sense to me. It probably would not make sense to me. I don't think I'd be able to fathom that nobody knows about slavery in Canada. And not only not know about it, but without fail, that Canadians were valiant abolitionists. What does that mean, valiant abolitionists? Meaning they were, pro abolishing slavery. Meaning Europeans in Canada, Caucasians in Canada are good people. You can't say it any other way. White Canadians are good people because they abolished slavery. That's what's taught on this earth. This professor says, without fail, not one goddamn student. That is insanity. Well done, Canada. It says, is that white Canadians were valiant abolitionists who freed the northward bound African American enslaved people through the 19th century networks known as the Underground Railroad. And every time what's interesting, and again, I'm just I'm just a poor old black uneducated man. That's what, every white person is going to say in the comments. They're going to say I'm uneducated, I don't know anything, I ain't got no job, I ain't got nothing better to do. I'm just an uneducated brother, and every time I talk to a brother or sister in America, they all believe the same thing. Like, well done to the Caucasian race inside of Canada. Well done. The earth believes that there are good white people and they are Canadian. Damn, this professor said without fail, not one goddamn student. They all believe that, white Canadians abolished slaves. And they were valiant about it. Man, white Canadians, they didn't just abolish, they fought for that shit. Man, that's crazy. Let me keep on reading. It says, and they keep going on. The stories of good white Canadians as the saviors. The stories of good white Canadians as the saviors of fearful, hunted, and tormented African Americans Damn. Canadians were the saviors. They were the good white Canadians. I gotta save this article. Saviors of fearful, hunted, and tormented African American fugitives fit neatly into our national identity as a racially tolerant, multicultural society. But the existence of Joe reminds us that this country was itself founded upon the strategic exploitation of certain populations. Canada, in other words, is a country that was built on large-scale racism. Thousands had their lives, health, hopes, cultures, families, and dreams stolen from them while laboring tirelessly for the betterment and prosperity of a white elite. And nobody knows. I'm going to keep going. It says, to understand slavery in Canada, one must contemplate the physical and One must contemplate, to understand slavery in Canada, one must contemplate the physical and psychic abuses imposed upon the enslaved, which include whipping, branding, and the banning of African culture, such as music and language. Canadian owners also sought to control the enslaved on a biological level by imposing a matrilineal order. Any child born to an enslaved female assumed the mother's status, instantly becoming the property of her owner, while many white male owners fathered mixed-race children through rape or coercive relationships. They also exploited Black people as breeders of new property through forced sexual pairings. Man, when we say the white man is the devil, Canada, you Caucasians in Canada, you are the devil. You did an excellent job representing your nation, representing Idumea. Did an excellent job. Renaming was another way to demean Africans. Oh, man, you that's what I say, man. What slavery was no different in Canada than it was in America. And I'm gonna start arguing that slavery in Canada was worse. I'm gonna make an argument for it because shoot, the Bible says prove all things, and because these goddamn Caucasians in Canada have done such a good job hiding Canadian history, I don't know how you prove me wrong. Someone's going to have to try and prove me wrong that slavery in Canada wasn't worse. It says renaming was another way to demean Africans. They beat our names out of us. They beat our culture, our language. They molested and raped, sexually assaulted. They did everything on God's green earth that is evil to Blacks and Indigenous people. They did that inside of Canada. After having purchased slaves, an overseer often stripped them of their names, imposing whimsical, comical, or humiliating ones instead, like Hercules, Caesar, or Monkey. Man. What's that? You see that scene in Roots where they're beating that, so-called African Kunta Kinte, telling them, your name is Toby, boy. Shoot, they renaming you Monkey inside of Canada. They're calling you Hercules inside of Canada. These goddamn devils, they need to be stopped. It says, many examples of this practice can be found in the repository of fugitive ads In 1794, Michael Wallace of Nova Scotia placed a notice for the return of a Negro man servant named Belfast. He conceded that the fugitive called himself Bill. Likewise, when in 1789 an enslaved woman named Phyllis escaped from Abel Missioner of Falmouth, Nova Scotia, a fugitive ad revealed that she called herself Betty. Although slavery was abolished by British Parliament in 1833, and now that was a date that I was saying earlier, 1833 is when the British Parliament abolished slavery in Canada, which again, that's 40 years before slavery, before Canada's even a country. Canada's not a country yet. It says racism persisted in Canada. The structural inequalities that sustained slavery for 400 years could not be abolished by a mere act of legislation. So, similar to America, what was that year? 1863, they abolished slavery. Slavery wasn't over just like that in America. They had different black codes that were put into place. You had labor that you had to work off. People were put into trades. They had, what was that called? Vagrancy laws, where if your black ass was caught not working, you were put back in slavery, for a time to quote unquote pay off your debt. All these things were happening in Canada just as well. So 1833, just because they abolished slavery doesn't mean that, your black ass didn't have a debt to pay off. Could you imagine that? You have a debt. You're working for free, getting whipped on your goddamn back, and you have a debt to pay off? You Caucasians are something else, man. It says, racism persisted in Canada. The structural inequalities that sustained slavery for 400 years could not be abolished by a mere act of legislation. They lived on in the hearts and minds of white Canadians who fought to retain sole control of political, legal, social, and cultural institutions. It would take more than a century for government to outlaw racial discrimination. The cases of Fred Christie denied the right to service at a Montreal bar in 1936, and Viola Desmond manhandled out of her seat in a new Glasgow, Nova Scotia cinema in 1946 are just two examples of overt racial bias against Black Canadians 1 century after slavery had ended. In neither case were the establishments marked with conspicuous signage separating whites from coloreds, as had been in the case in America at the time. That's simply not the way Canadians have sustained racism in this country. Our methods are arguably more insidious and covert. And I always said this, to people, my peers, my brothers, when I was growing up, because I spent a good amount of time living in Florida when I was a teenager. I spent some time living in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I remember my experiences in the States versus Canada. And I would always tell people, in America, at least white people tell me, they don't like me because of my color. Whereas in Canada, I don't know when I'm around you devils. I don't know what the hell you're thinking in your mind. And I've had experiences, where I've gone to, I remember going to a bar one time, as a young brother. I was like 18, 19 years old. I went to a bar inside of Canada, and, these devils came out of the bar, bumped my shoulder, and they said, oh, there's too many niggers in this, too many niggers in these, at this bar. You know what I mean? And I remember, I always remember that because I don't know where this black man came from. He just came out of nowhere in this parking lot and swung at this devil. And then I remember my boy pulling me inside of a car and driving off. And I remember always saying, like, I wish somebody would just tell me. I wish these white people would be courageous and just tell me to my goddamn face they don't want me here. Because I won't come and I'll be good. You know what I mean? I'll go, with my Jamaicans or whatever bar and listen to dancehall and reggae all night and be blessed. I don't need to be around you white people. I'm good. And I would always tell people that. And this is, something that is echoed amongst all blacks inside of Canada. Is that, our methods in Canada, white meaning Caucasians. Salaki, give me 1 second. Forgive me, just give me 1 second. You know what I mean? But I was just saying that, it's echoed that, Europeans inside of Canada, they're covert racists. All right, Salaki, 1 second. All right. Yeah, forgive me for that. So it was saying that Canadians have sustained racism in this country. Our methods are arguably more insidious and covert. All right. And I'm just saying that that's the statement that's echoed, amongst Canadians. It says, let's see if I go on. How much time we got? I'm gonna pivot a little bit. You know what I mean? I gotta save this article because it does such an elegant job of depicting Caucasians inside of Canada. And I want to continue on with the timeline. So, like I said, 1833, Canada abolishes slavery. Allegedly abolishes slavery in Canada. We just read about some instances all the way up until the 1940s, of racism still heavily existing inside of Canada. And if you want to, better understand those timelines, the same time that the, what do you call it? That the, what Martin Luther King was doing, the word's slipping my tongue right now, but when Black people were fighting for integration, those social activist, groups that were fighting for integration of Blacks to integrate into white society, those timelines in America are the exact same in Canada. So you get around 1960s and, now the Black man can sit in a white man's movie theater. Viola Desmond is an example, of Black activists fighting for the right, to sit at a goddamn bar with a white man, to go to a white man's restaurant. We fought for that, which makes no sense at all because Lord knows white people can't cook. Why you would want to go to some white restaurant, when you can go to, go to every goddamn Black, Hispanic, and indigenous restaurant there is known to man. Can't tell me that Mexican and indigenous food and Jamaican food and Trinidadian food isn't better than, some, Wendy's or Harvey's hamburger. That is insanity what we did. But those timelines, are damn near the same time, around the 1960s. Black people don't have to go to all Black schools anymore inside of Canada. Okay, inside of Canada, we had all Black schools, all Black barbers. You know what I mean? We had I'm not gonna call it a Black Wall Street, but we had Black credit unions. You know what I mean? Black banks. Where we went and did our business because we weren't integrated into white society. Okay, so 1833, you have the abolishment of slavery in Canada. And remember these dates, that's 1833. Then you have 18 what was that? I think I still have it up. 1867. Okay, 1867 is 4 years after the abolishment of slavery in America. And in 1867 is when Canada officially becomes recognized as a country. That's why I say again, the Caucasian is such a devil, because they'll sit here and say, well, Canada didn't have slaves. We weren't even a country yet. Which is why I'm pulling up this next article, so that we can understand, the mind of Canadians, the mind of white people when Canada is being established as a country. Let me see where I got it here. Okay, this is for anybody that doesn't know, it's a man named Sir John A. Macdonald. Sir John A. Macdonald was, you could say, Canada's first president. Okay? We don't use the word president in Canada. We say a prime minister. So Sir John A. Macdonald is the first king, the first prime minister of Canada. Okay? As Canada is established as a country in 1867. See if I can zoom in. And I just wanted to get straight to the point. This was, again, because of the things like the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, that we were able to find history like this, about Canada. We didn't learn about Sir John A. Macdonald till 2008 inside of Canada. You say when the white man's a devil, we better stand on that shit. Salakia. I gotta read the Bible to know the white man's a devil. Just look at what these people have done. God damn, who is more deceptive than these people? This is Sir John A. Macdonald fact sheet on, his beginnings as a president of Canada. It says, I'm not going to read all of them, okay? It says, just some point form on Sir John A. Macdonald. The racism and oppression committed by him when he became president. Okay, Sir John A. Macdonald cleared the prairies through let me see, zoomed in a little bit too much, come back one. It says he cleared the prairies through the deliberate starvation and detention of the indigenous people in order to make way for European settlement and construction of the railroad. So we thought, Sir John A. Macdonald and Canada were valiant abolitionists of slavery. That's what everybody's taught. However, Sir John A. Macdonald, the first president, he starved indigenous people. Starved them so that European settlement could grow. This is your first president of Canada. He executed the Métis leader, Louis Riel, in 1885. This man executed the leader of indigenous peoples inside of Canada. That's Canada's first president. It says Macdonald's Indian agents explicitly withheld food in order to drive bands onto reserves and out of the railroad, A liberal MP at the time called it a policy of submission shaped by a policy of starvation. What did Christ say? That this man was a murderer from the beginning. He's responsible for starving indigenous people. It says McDonald's authorized the pass system, which required First Nations to obtain permission from their Indian agent to leave their reserve. Ooh, Sir John A. Macdonald, he pretty racist. Sir John A. Macdonald, he was a staunch supporter of segregation. You don't want your Indian ass leaving the reserve. He's the man responsible for authorizing the pass system. Both those policies would persist well into the 20th century, all the way up to Hooper 2018. 2018, the pass system in Canada was still alive in some parts of Canada. Remember that. It says McDonald was a key in the implementation of the residential school policy that took 150,000 Indigenous children from their families to suffer cultural genocide. Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada 2015. They released that Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first president, up until 10 years ago, nobody knew this inside of Canada. They released this information that he is the reason. He's a key person in implementing residential schools inside of Canada. If you don't know about residential schools in Canada, you're going to have to check out some of our other classes. You know what I mean? Check out some documentaries. Find out what happened on those residential schools. It says McDonald created the Northwest Mounted Police, the RCMP. What's another word for that? The slave catchers. That's what their original purpose was. I want to jump down to some of his quotes. There's two more here. McDonald was a leader in the creation of British North America Act, which included in Section 91, which legislates federal jurisdiction over Indians and lands reserved for the Indians. He was the joint premier of the province of Canada. McDonald was a leader in the creation of the Gradual Civilization Act. The leader of the creation of the Gradual Civilization Act. That'll be a good one to read if we have time. Because that act was basically the blueprint on how to quote unquote civilize Indigenous people. I should read that. It says the Gradual Civilization Act aimed to enfranchise First Nations men into settler society, province of Canada, and in the process turn lands of Indigenous nations into private property, which could be taxed by settler governments. In this act, Indigenous women and children under the age of 21 were attached to the men in their lives, a settler ideology and practice of heteropatriarchy imposed through this legislation. These are some quotes by Sir John A. Macdonald. This is a quote by Sir John A. Macdonald. I have reason to believe that the agents as a whole are doing all they can by refusing food until the Indians are on the verge of starvation to reduce the expense. This is a quote by Sir John A. Macdonald that was used in the House of Commons in 1882. It's one of Sir John A. Macdonald's quotes. Is that he believes that agents are doing all they can by refusing food until the Indians are on the verge of starvation. Another quote he has, when the school is on the reserve, the child lives with his parents who are savages. He is surrounded by savages. He is simply a savage who can read and write. That was a quote by Sir John A. Macdonald, calling indigenous people savages. That's in 1882 in the House of Commons. This is 50 years after slavery is abolished. The first president of Canada looks at us as savages. And that was a quote to, that's when he was speaking on the importance of residential schools. Here's some more quotes. It says, all these poor people know is that Canada has bought the country from the Hudson's Bay's Company and that they are handed over like a flock of sheep to us. The great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and assimilate the Indian people in all respects with the other inhabitants of the Dominion as speedily as they are fit to change. He says, the executions of the Indians ought to convince the red man that the white man governs. Ooh-wee. Oh, I like that one right there from Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first president. The execution of the Indians ought to convince the red man that the white man governs. I remember asking a devil in Canada one time, what he thought, about how Canada has dealt with the indigenous people. And he said, we were really good at killing. I always remember that quote. Because I appreciate when white people are proud of their history, proud of the evils that they did on this earth. Because they remind me and represent people like Sir John A. Macdonald. We got to keep killing the red man. We have to continually commit mass genocide on these savages in order to convince him that this is the white man's society, that the white man governs Canada. Can't tell me Christ, wasn't on point when he said he was a murderer from the beginning. We got to convince these savages that Canada belongs to us. I want to know where. I remember this one brother I was talking to, and it was a quick conversation of why I don't celebrate Thanksgiving. And that brother said, what are you talking about? Canadians didn't unalive indigenous people. He said Europeans inside of Canada didn't murder indigenous people. That's not our history. That's not Canada's history. Man, this coon sat here and took up for the white man. Like, Canadians are some good people. And I'm never, as a black man, gonna tell another brother, you know, that you're stupid or retarded or ignorant as hell, you know, for not knowing any better. Because I understand that oppression worked. I understand that the white man is the devil. I understand that Caucasians did an amazing job inside of Canada teaching the world that they were valiant abolitionists. They fought hard for the freedom of black slaves. They fought hard for the freedom of indigenous slaves. How did you fight for the freedom of indigenous slaves? When you sit in here in 1885 saying we have to continue the genocide of these people to convince them that the white man rules Canada. I thought slavery was abolished in 1830. Well, if slavery was abolished in 1833 in Canada, you damn sure didn't stop murdering us by the millions. Up until 1885, you didn't stop murdering us because you had to convince the savages that the white man ruled Canada. That's the first prime minister. So I guess indigenous, we're not enslaved anymore. I guess the Mohawks and the Creeks and the Algonquins, the Cherokee inside of Canada, they're not enslaved anymore in 1885, but you damn sure didn't stop murdering us. The first president said the execution of the Indians ought to convince the red man that the white man governs. Canada's first president in 1885 said that. He said celebrating the potlatch is a misdemeanor. The Indian festival is debauchery of the worst kind. And the departmental officers and all clergymen unite in affirming that it is absolutely necessary to put this practice down. So in 1894, Sir John A. Macdonald made sure that these potlucks and powwows were illegal. They were a misdemeanor. I'm going to have to look up what those potlatches were because I'm curious to know, you know, what my indigenous brothers and sisters were celebrating, what they were doing. It says, we have been pampering and coaxing. Let me look at what that means. What is the definition of coaxing? Coaxing is the act of gently and persistently persuading, influencing, or gently urging someone. So it says, we have been pampering and persistently persuading. That's what Sir John A. Macdonald said. We have been pampering and persistently persuading the Indians. We must take a new course. We must vindicate the position of the white man. We must teach the Indians what law is. That's what Sir John A. Macdonald said in 1885. So coaxing meaning we're being too soft on these savages. That's what Sir John A. Macdonald said in 1885. We're being too soft. He said we must take a new course. We must vindicate the position of the white man. We must teach the Indians what law is. Doesn't that sound a lot like Manifest Destiny? You see, this is what Caucasians believe. This is what the Prime Minister of Canada, The first president of Canada, he believed in manifest destiny. That white people are sent by God to teach these savages how to be civil people. Macdonald is a significant part of Canadian history. Okay? These are some of the things, and I'm going to stop that there. Let me stop sharing my screen. All right. All right, Salakia. Those were some of the, statements of Canada's first prime minister, first president. I remember doing a class on this one time. I was doing a class on the residential schools inside of Canada. And I remember that there's so much more that Sir John A. Macdonald had to say about my native Indian brothers inside of Canada. On his beliefs on how badly they needed to be civilized. Sir John A. Macdonald is known for praising the Catholic priests and the Catholic nuns inside of boarding schools, saying how good of a job they were doing in these residential schools. That's Sir John A. Macdonald. That's Canada's first president. This stuff wasn't known until 2015. 2008, there's a whole goddamn committee organized to just making people aware. Just making people aware of some of the crimes of Indigenous people. We just went to a powwow in Toronto on Saturday. And I spoke to, there was a sister I was speaking to there. And, she had, I remember something she had said, which I should have, spoke on more with my brothers while we were there. But, and looking back, I actually kind of hurts my heart a little bit that I wasn't being more compassionate, because one of the comments that she made was, I know my parents, my grandparents were, no, she said my parents were in residential schools. I can't remember if I was doing an interview at the time, and I didn't think more to pick up on what she said. But as I'm sitting here, replaying what happened on Saturday, this past Saturday, she said, I know my parents were on the residential schools. And at the time, I was just thinking about, she knows, she was saying it to say she's educated. She knows what happened on the residential schools. Her family went through it. And I was thinking of it as a, more of she's saying it because of, from an information perspective, and she probably was. But in saying that, the pain behind that statement probably goes deeper than anybody will ever know. The pain of your parents and your family being on residential schools. Like the last residential school, let me look that up, in Canada. I believe it was in Burlington or Brantford. What's the date? I'm going to ask Google this. What's the date of the last residential school closure inside of Canada. I think it was in Brantford or Burlington. AI says the last federally funded residential school in Canada closed in 1997. Prior to this, Gordon Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan closed its doors in 1996. And, you know, I remember always thinking about that because while I'm in school inside of Canada at an elementary school, my indigenous brothers, you know, are sitting inside of a residential school. You know, some brothers and sisters are older than me. You know what I mean? You're sitting in high school while our brothers are in residential schools. Some of us a little older, you know, you're 30 years old, you're in the workforce, and our brothers are on residential schools inside of Canada. The pain and suffering, you know, going on of our people is happening while we're here in Canada just living our lives, don't even know about these goddamn schools. Sir John A. Macdonald being the first president of Canada is the reason that these schools, you know, existed inside of Canada. So as Canada is established as a country, like that sister said in the video earlier, Canada is built off racism. We read in an article, it's built off the backs of slaves. That's Canada's history, and nobody knows about it. The title of the class was Canada Hiding History. Is it too dark? Is that why people don't know about it? That is not the reason. The reason people don't know about Canada's history is because the white man is the devil that the Bible speaks of. Let me see. There's a scripture. I believe it's in the book of Revelations. Revelations, I'm gonna pull this chapter out. Revelations chapter 12 and verse 19, or Revelations 12 and verse 9. Okay. Again, make sure you like, share, subscribe to this class. All right, help push this truth out. All right, we're gonna end off with this verse right here, because this is the reason why people don't know about Canadian history. This is the book of Revelations, chapter 12 and verse 9. And it says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil. You know, I broke this down earlier. He's that serpent, that snake from the beginning. He was a murderer from the beginning. That's the characteristics of the Caucasian race. These people are known as Edomites in the Bible. That's their biblical name. These Russians, these Britons, these Irish, the Scottish, these people who identify as being Caucasians on the earth today, the Bible calls them the nation of Edom, or Idumeans. And these people have different characteristics. You use a simile or an analogy to describe these people. They are beasts. They are animals. They're animalistic. They're serpents. They're snakes. They're two-faced. These are the characteristics of these people in the Bible. It says, and that great dragon. What's a great dragon? Picture, picture some flying serpent. Think of Game of Thrones. That flying dragon, flying serpent, spitting out fire on the earth. Look up the dates when Caucasians had air superiority over this earth. They got jets flying over the world, dropping bombs like it's nobody's business. Look at Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma. That is a great dragon. You got a plane flying through the sky, dropping bombs on black civilization, on black cities. That is a great dragon. This is what John was seeing in a vision. John's having dreams of these people, and he's like, damn, they're like great dragons. He says that old serpent, what's that old serpent? That's that devil in the beginning who convinced a sister to disobey her husband and disobey her God. That is a devil. That is a serpent. That is a snake. You talking to a man's wife behind his back, telling him to do something that goes against his household. Only a serpent would do something so disgusting. And that's the characteristics of these people. Called the devil. What does devil mean in the Bible? It means a deceiver. What did Christ say? He's the father of lies. That's who these Caucasians are. And Satan. These Caucasians are all of these things. They are Satan themselves. You know what I mean? They work for Satan. They do the job of Satan. It says, which deceiveth the whole world. You imagine that? The whole earth believes that white Canadians fought to abolish slavery. Well done, Canada. Well done. You deceived the world. People believe that Canada is a safe place for blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous. You deceive the world. That's why people don't know about your past. That's why people don't know about your history. So with that, we're going to close another Monday history class. All right. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. All right. Share these classes. Push the truth. All right. And with that, I say shalom.
Hey, listen, brothers and sisters, man. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button, man. Subscribe to this channel. And also, please, go to isubk.com and pay your tithe. Drop me some cash so we can move around this planet like we need to, man, and do the things we need to do.
They're one West. They're one West. They're one West. They're